Hello and welcome to Also Interesting. This episode will be entirely in English. Joining me today is the musician and podcast star, John Roderick. Hello.
Hello, nice to be back on your show.
Currently, I'm in Berlin, and every day when I'm crossing the Alexanderplatz, I think about the last time we talked about your brief visit to East Berlin.
Yeah, I think about it a lot too. Now, we talked since I was just most recently in Berlin. Is that right?
I think so. We talked about a year ago.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, good. Yeah.
When I'm talking with friends about the current state of the world, they are very worried about the current developments in the United States. You, as my reference fellow American, how are things doing for you? How is life going?
Well, things are fairly normal. As you know, we live in Washington State, which is one of the more progressive states. And in the United States, the individual states, the 50 states, have a lot of power and autonomy. And the federal government has a certain amount of power, and the federal government can use certainly it can take money away from states that don't please it. But a state like Washington, which has a very progressive governor, and Seattle has a progressive government, and also we're a wealthy state. So the federal government can threaten to take money from us, but we have a lot more money than, say, Mississippi or Alabama.
There is the saying, thank God there's Mississippi, because they are always the last in every chart.
Yeah, unfortunately. And you know, the problem of being an American, one of the many, is that you're always kind of torn between, and I'm sure this is true in some ways in Germany, but you're torn between wanting to help your fellow citizens in Mississippi who are defenseless. You know, they just happen to be born there. There's no reason, that they should be punished. But then at the same time, Mississippi consistently votes in such a way that it is to its own disadvantage. They're one of the poorest states, but they always vote for the candidates that are the most exploitative of them.
Well, but the doggy department is making America great again.
A lot of Americans, and I think people worldwide, are very full of a feeling of impending doom, and I tend to maintain a more hopeful, sort of Enlightenment liberal attitude. I was telling some of my podcast listeners about Kant and how Kant had been a student of Rousseau, but Kant had a more practical sense of there being a universal moral code. And Kant believed that we would slip backwards, or commercialism was part of the path. And I like to look at the Trump administration. They're a bunch of clowns. They have no plan. They're just, every day is a new day to them. They have no sense of the future or the past.
Yes.
It's just like dealing with toddlers. And so because the American system is built the way it is, I still believe they can do every attempt to be authoritarian that they want, but I still believe that there are checks on their power.
Honestly, it feels like some of my, I wouldn't say friends, some of my Republicans in my protosphere, they are doubling down. They're saying, yes, it's currently worse, but it will be way better. So we need to go through some rough times. And I mean, egg prices are on an all-time high. The people ain't believing the president and the institutions. So I can't see where the rough times will end and things will start to shine again.
Well, except that it's very hard for us to remember how difficult the year 1968 was.
Well,
in 1968, half the world was on fire. And it seemed like American democracy was over and our cities were going to burn. and in Paris and in Prague, globally, we seemed like on the verge of a global revolution. And now we look back at 1968, and half of the people, all they remember is Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, and that was the year where the United States preparated for landing on the moon.
That's right. That's right. A year later, we were on the moon. And it's not that everything immediately got better, but if you think of 1973, it was the first time a United States president was under threat of being impeached and tried with a crime in office.
Mm.
And at that time, we thought that it was the end of the presidency. No one would ever trust the government again. And the president that followed, Ford, did not have very high approval ratings, but 2 presidents later, we had Ronald Reagan, who made America great again the first time.
Yeah, Reaganomics is a term that even I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
By the way, you recently crossed my university studies because you got selected as an example. Bean Dad got selected as an example for an internet shitstorm, and you made it to my sociology books.
I mean, in an actual book?
In an actual
sociology book?
In a reader, I had to read for university.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I've said many times to people here in Seattle, because I'm a celebrity in Seattle, it's hard for people here to kind of understand that I'm also known, more broadly. And I say to people, no, Bean Dad was international. It went around the world, and they're like, oh, come on. And I'm like, I'm telling you, man.
There are textbooks in German universities where Bean Dad is an example. And honestly, I was quite offended because they didn't represent it the way I would interpret it. So they said that Bean Dad was a scapegoat to divert the interest from January 6th. And I would say the opposite is the truth. So actually that the January 6th got the attention away from the Bean Dad controversy.
Oh, it's true. Bean Dad was already 3 days old before January 6th. It started on January 3rd. Or 2nd, maybe even. So yeah, it was the morning of January 6th, Bean Dad was still the top 4 trending topics on the internet. And about halfway through the day, people started to say, wait a minute, there's something happening in Washington, D.C. that's maybe more important than this guy and his can opener.
Well,
so
my mother, she is... her first language is German. She learned English at school, but is rarely using it. And she tried to listen to our last episode, and she thought that you're talking about bees, like honeybees, and that you're talking about the mass devastation of bees.
Yeah, right. My daughter had a can of bees. Well, I hope you explained it to her. And hello, if she listens to this episode. Hello.
Yeah, she will. She's listening to most of my episodes. When I'm currently talking with friends about the United States, many of them, they are diverging plans, they're canceling trips, they don't attend trade fairs in the States because they are at least a little bit afraid that border control would send them to El Salvador.
Yeah,
and
right.
Currently I'm trying to get a fellowship in the States, so I'm trying to study over there. But friends are honestly afraid, and many of my liberal friends are canceling their trips and plans. Would you say it's just some overreaction because there are some news, but would you say it's generally safe to travel as a European to the States right now?
Oh, I think it's safe, but I think that canceling trips is, unless it's absolutely necessary to take the trip, I think canceling trips is good because the way American capitalism describes itself to itself is that the market determines what is best.
Money talks.
That's right. And if Europe decides that America is too unpredictable, or you're not a good partner, and Europe says, we're not dealing with you anymore. We're not going to travel to America, and also we're not going to play this tariff game. Then the markets are going to respond, and what you'll find is that the markets are the hidden hand. Trump is not he's not immune to markets. He's not above them, and all of his capitalist friends will very quickly become his capitalist masters when they see that the economy just keeps plummeting, right? So I think it's a very valid message to send to not come. I think that fear is the language of our modern times, and everything we talk about it from a standpoint of fear. We're afraid of everything now. And it's a bad way to live. And it's not a way of developing a constructive plan for the future.
I'm somehow disappointed because I don't agree with most of the things the new government is doing, but I really had high hopes in MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, because honestly, it's quite shocking for a European to be in the States, and I mean, cornstarch and corn syrup in all your breads. How are you eating?
Well, just as in Germany and all across Europe, there are many, many people here that are interested in good, pure food, healthy food. Within 2 miles of where I live, you can get homemade sourdough bread that only has 4 ingredients. There's a store up at the corner here that sells only completely organic foods. So what you're talking about is the mass-produced foods that are used in, American food. There is a lot of trash. And that trash is it's part of the unchecked mechanization of making food here. And Europe always put the brakes on that stuff and said, no, we're not going to use hormones. No, we're not going to put sugar in everything. And I think for a long time, the attitude in America was that you were all a bunch of hippies. But of course, here it's a class distinction. If you're wealthy, if you're educated, you have access to really good, high-quality foods, and everybody that's wealthy and educated eats that way, or most people. And it's just another way of distinguishing who's high class, who's middle class, who's working class, and who is low class.
There's some things I think most people would agree on. For example, when Kennedy said that you shouldn't be able to buy soft drinks with food stamps, that's something I can get my mind around. I mean, I can understand where he's coming from. He want to make the people healthier on his terms, but there are some things where I think it's necessary to do something, but I'm not sure. Initially, I was surprised by many of his ideas, like banning food dyes that are illegal in Canada, but in the US they are allowed. But looking now from some days he's in office, I think he is not capable of doing what he promised.
Yeah, and the problem, I think, a lot of the time with certain ideas in America is they get attached to philosophies. And if you discredit the philosophy, then it kind of blanket discredits all the ideas, even when some of them are not bad. Like Kennedy is presumably against vaping, and I'm also against vaping.
There's a plant-based alternative to vaping.
Yeah, plant-based alternative to vaping. But he also doesn't, he also believes in ivermectin or like half of his beliefs are just sort of unsupported by science.
Yeah, or actually they're supported by his crude interpretation of science.
Yeah, right. But this is part of the American problem of, and it's true in all of the West. how much you want to regulate versus how much you want to allow people the freedom of choice, and whether regulation hurts business or helps business. And we're going through a long period in the United States, a long period, where the people that believe regulation inhibits progress have just been winning. It's not even a debate, because they can't win the debate, but they just win the argument by being loudest. And there's a lot of people in the U.S. that if you present the argument and say, oh, well, the government wants to regulate you, they'll be against it. And you come out and say, well, no, the government wants to regulate how much poison they put in your food. The government wants there to be air traffic controllers, and it wants to prevent businesses from dumping uranium into the water. And then the Republicans say they're trying to take away your freedom to have uranium water. And
I don't want Kamala Harris to put the uranium out of my water.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so it's very difficult to, we've reached a point where you no longer can appeal to the mass of people by using reason, because there are, somehow we went from wanting diversity of ideas to a place where a diversity of ideas means that there's no one truth and everybody gets their own truth. And so in light of somebody saying, oh, uranium in your water is good for you, and then you say, well, no, it's not.
It's a free country. If you don't like your uranium, just drink some other water.
Yeah, right. But half of the people look at me and they go, well, you're one of those. You're one of those that's against uranium. And I'm like, I am. I really am.
Go vote, go broke. No uranium.
And so, and one of the problems, of course, is that liberals are just as susceptible to saying, well, the people are too stupid to vote for the right thing, and so we need to exercise more control, and democracy isn't working, and people need to be kind of, forced or coerced into doing the right thing. But the problem is that's what the people on the right think too.
I recently read the new book by Ezra Klein, Abundance.
Yes.
Had you the chance reading it too?
I haven't read it, but I've read his editorials in the New York Times.
And he is making the point that many Americans actually vote against their interests, and that the whole Republican movement is people misunderstanding politics. And it's so sad to see that, because I think that there are many persons with a reasonable argument to select whatever will change the current government, because just have a look at it. But then they're selecting some billionaires and oligarchs, and one word I learned that I really love, broligarchs. And the broligarchs are sharing the cake, and they ain't sharing it with us.
Yeah, this is the problem with, I think, with having patience with the American system, but also finding a path back to a sense of shared reality. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to save America. The guy who's coming from the Appalachian Mountains, who's only read the Bible and the other Bible, he thinks he's saving America. And my friends who live around here who want us to live in a liberal utopia, they also want to save America. It's not a question of everybody not wanting, to do the best thing they can imagine. Mm. It's a problem of us not having a shared reality. And we do have our system of sort of a triangular shaped government with the judicial and the presidential and the legislative. It works. The system is resilient. but it doesn't work if you don't elect reasonable people to the office.
Recently, so there's the newsletter of the Library of Congress, and it's one of my favorite newsletters, to be honest, because you don't expect it, but sometimes it's hilarious. And
they are funny.
we talked about something. I don't know if you read it. There is a new act upcoming, and it's called the Pelosi Act. Congress.gov. It's the short form for preventing elected leaders from owning securities and investments. Short Pelosi. Right. So they really did a good one there. But it's a Republican senator who pitched it. And actually, I think it's a reasonable and a good idea to untangle the US officials and money. But it's so hard to agree with somebody who, on the other hand, thinks that gay people are the devil and everybody and their cat should own a gun. So it's hard to argue with somebody who sometimes does things I would agree on, like the Pelosi Act.
Well, and that is the compromise of politics in a democratic society.
Mm.
That you go into a meeting room with someone whose politics you really disagree with, and you come out after a long meeting having agreed on a law or a policy with this person you despise. And it means that they had to lose something and you had to lose something. You have to trade some important thing and they trade an important thing in order to find the common law.
Hmm.
And it's very frustrating to people, especially when you're dealing with somebody on the other side of the line that just believes that the earth is flat. But the problem is that up until recently, even those people who believed the earth is flat realized that they had to bring something to the table.
Shut up, Globehead. You're one of them.
But now they don't. Now they just say, well, I'm going to shut the government down. I'm a legislator and I'm going to stand here and pass no law because I know I'm going to get elected because the people back in my district all believe the earth was created in 7 days. And
6 days, the seventh was for rest.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. I got that wrong. 6 days.
By the way, I own the Trump Bible. I bought it as a present for somebody, and I gifted it together with a book called How to Talk with Your Cat About Gun Safety.
What is the Trump Bible? Can you tell me more about it?
He published one. So the Trump Foundation whatsoever that are where are they located? Not in the States. They are in the Seychelles or something located. So they nobody has to pay any taxes to anybody, and they are making products like the MAGA hats, and they are also publishing a Bible. And because Trump got asked what's his favorite Bible quote, and he said it's too personal, and now he published his own Bible. it's just the New and the Old Testament, but it's leather wrapped, and there's Trump all over it, and it's kind of crazy that this product exists.
It's very Antichrist, right? Isn't this like Nostradamus level of like, well, the Antichrist will come and publish his own Bible with his name all over it?
Actually, Melania was holding one of the Trump Bibles when he got inaugurated the second time so that he can swear on his own Bible.
Incredible. I didn't know that. You know, part of how I've been maintaining a certain amount of sanity is that I have stopped consuming the news at that level.
Yes, but the new season USA is incredible. You won't believe it. They have an anti-vaxxer as their health minister. They have Elon Musk, an autistic man, who's bringing the hat game to another level. Have you seen him? He was wearing a hat on his head so he can make a joke about it. And
I did see, yeah.
He was wearing a hat saying Dark MAGA, and on top of that, he was wearing a hat stating Gulf of America. So, I mean, from the outside perspective, your politics is the best entertainment in the world.
Yeah, I know, except that we are incredibly dangerous. We were dangerous when we were being run by sane people. It's really, I'm not, partly I'm not scared because over the last 10 years, I've spent a lot of time with people in the American military. I went to the Army War College for a week-long sort of seminar there. But when I was King Neptune in Seattle here, I met all the admirals that run the Navy here in the Northwest.
Oh, King Neptune, it's a reference I get because I'm listening to your podcasts, but you got the uniform or something like that?
Well, it was, it's a ceremonial role. We have a summertime festival where it's basically the Navy comes, the Air Force comes, and we have a week-long there are powerboat races, and it's just a summer festival. And it takes over the whole city. And it's not part of anything else in America. It's just located in Seattle. And the ceremonial head of the festival dresses up like King Neptune and goes around the city, and there are a couple of groups of pirates that have big trucks that look like pirate ships, and they run around the town shooting cannons, and there are clowns, and it takes over the whole city. And so I was the ceremonial grandmaster one summer, and what you end up doing is being invited to all the things. And of course, I made my own uniform because I wasn't satisfied with, the fact that they give you a little crown and a scepter. I said, no. And I designed my, my uniform on Kaiser Wilhelm. I put a bit of big, all the medals and sashes and so forth. And I would go to all these things. Well, all of the military treats the festival very seriously. It's the whole fleet comes to town. There's an aircraft carrier. There, the Blue Angels.
The parade is no party.
But I, when I walked into the room full of admirals, I walked right over to them and said, "Listen, you're not used to having to deal with royalty in this country, but I am the king of this city, and so I'm not going to take any shit off of you." And I'm in my early 50s at this point. Well, all the admirals are in their 50s. So they looked at me and I looked at them, and we were all immediately fast friends. Well, of course, then I'm asking them on the side, what are you going to do if Trump orders this kind of attack? What are you going to do if you get an order that you think is unlawful? And of course, they're not going to say, because it's against their oath, to say that they would disobey an order. But in the way that people are able to communicate their real thoughts and their real feelings, I developed a lot of confidence in the officer corps of the United States Navy.
Yeah, I'm somehow surprised, because with time and listening to more and more people, the U.S. military, one of the biggest employees in the United States, they seem to be way more progressive than one would assume from the outside. So that they say, yeah, sure, if Trump would send the command to nuke the world, I don't know, we could resign, and I'm having a bad day, such a headache, I can't handle that right now. So it seems like they are in control for real and not him.
Well, of course they follow the Constitution. And if you read the American military's founding documents, they swear an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. Now, the president is the head of the government, and so they are, they serve in a government that's run by the president, but the president can't order, only Congress can declare war. And the president is very much limited in his power to just sweep his arm and say, go do it. Now, it happens sometimes because the military at the time really wants to do whatever the thing is. The U.S. Military really wanted to fight the Vietnam War.
Yeah, that was one of the points I would make later, because officially the United States never declared war with Vietnam. So technically you had just a brief intervention. It's not a war, because a war needs to be declared.
Right. And so you do see all the time the U.S. military getting involved in these misadventures, but it's because the military itself is like really excited to go do it. In this case, the military is not excited to, and I don't mean to make it sound like the military in the U.S. can just do whatever it wants. I mean, it has to be that the political parties and the president and the generals are all. But if you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis,
I do.
They all wanted. I mean, every single general wanted to bomb Cuba and Russia. It was only Kennedy, in his power as the president, said, "That's not what we're going to do. We're not going to do that today." But so my confidence in talking to generals and admirals is that they are much more progressive than anybody would believe. They're all university educated. They've had an entire career in a military that's very focused on getting the most talented people it can. They have recruitment problems. They don't have enough people, and people are constantly saying, "Well, lower your standards a little bit," and they refuse. They're like, "We're not gonna get more soldiers by lowering our standards." Like most people that apply to join the U.S. Army don't. It's not like you just walk in. So I have a lot of confidence that the U.S. military is, at least right now, not being run by a bunch of trigger-happy MAGA people. I think it's quite the opposite.
In a broader way, I'm kind of glad that Trump got elected, because I think that he will tone down the Ukrainian interests, so the U.S. support for Ukraine. I mean, one can argue that they need all the possible ammunition and weapon systems to defend themselves, but I was really afraid of a proxy war with the US and Russia in Ukraine. And as somebody who's in the age of the people who have to die on the front for something both of them don't support, I'm up for everybody who will just, it's no peace deal, but every day they aren't shooting on each other is a good day. And with my pacifistic point of view, I'm making it's not the mainstream German view at the moment. At the moment, the mainstream political parties is saying support Ukraine, whatever it takes. I don't want to die in a useless war between US troops and Russia. So at least on that front, Trump may bring some peace.
Well, I am one of the people that, having grown up in the Cold War, I felt like the war in Ukraine it did several things. It really exposed how weak Russia is, both in terms of technology and in terms of materiel. What Russia has is a lot of young men that it can throw at a war, but the level of technology and equipment that they brought into Ukraine, it was kind of like at the end of the USSR when we realized that it had been a paper tiger the whole time. They had never been on par with Europe or America in terms of technology, or, they were always just teetering on the brink. And that's still true of Russia. And what Ukraine did, and it's terrible, of course, because of the carnage that's happened there, but the amount of money that the United States normally spends just to contain the Russians, we were not spending very much more to completely bog them down and exhaust them as a threat to world peace. And that's a terrible way to look at a war. But of course, that's part of what every war is.
Mm. When in 2016 Hillary Clinton tried to become the first female president, one of her promises was to fight Russia in Syria. And I'm still shocked that somebody tries to become president of the free world by saying, and I will continue a war with US troops in another country against another nation.
Yeah, well, and it turned out that this war with Hamas in Gaza ended up reverberating throughout the whole region, and it was the direct cause of the fall of Assad, and ultimately probably the cause of the loss of stature that Iran has now. I mean, Iran is back at the negotiating table because Hezbollah is wiped out, and I have a friend that lives in Amman, Jordan, and he's a Syria follower. He monitors Syria from Jordan, and he's just recently taken a trip to Damascus, one that he wouldn't have been able to do, and he has all this hope now for Syria. And a couple of years ago, I went to Lebanon and to Jordan and Israel and Palestine.
I'm still trying to get you some embroidered patches for the regions.
I really would love them. They're one of the only ones I'm missing. But, my experience of going to Beirut was this incredible feeling that Beirut and Lebanon should be among the wealthiest nations in the Mediterranean. Beautiful country, full of natural resources, incredibly diverse culture. Lebanon is this tremendous city, and it has no government and no economy, and it's just a disaster. Losing Assad, and maybe, obviously it's not going to be a democratic Syria right away. It seems like it's going to be still a theocratic state, but maybe a little bit more of a progressive one. Hopefully, maybe more of an open one.
Have you seen the images of the German foreign minister Annalena Baerbock? She went to Syria to negotiate about some aid, some money Germany would spend for the rebuilding of Syria. And the prime minister of Syria didn't shook her hand because she's a woman.
Oh, she's a woman. Oh.
And they pixeled her on the images from her visit. So the state with 1 million Syrians currently in it, Germany, sends their foreign minister, and they don't show her face on national TV because she ain't wearing any hijab, so her hair was visible. So they had to pixelate it because the founder of the world would be very unhappy if you could see her hair on TV. And it's so bonkers. I wish them all the best, but honestly, it's hard to negotiate with somebody who didn't even accept your foreign minister as an equal person.
Well, yeah, that's awful. And I think, now correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't the millions Syrians in Germany, aren't some large number of them considering now going back to Syria and trying to transform the country?
Well, there is a state-funded program. So if you're a refugee in Germany and you want to go back to Syria, you can actually get some money, about $1,000. So reasonable amount to start something in Syria. But it's complicated. So there are some people going back, but those who are right now going back, those are the ones who had the easiest integration into Germany. So when the war started, 2014, those who had the best qualification came first, and those who are, there's this ongoing meme of doctors and engineers, but there's some real doctors who came first when the war broke out, and they are now going back because they have the money, they have the opportunity, they are needed there. Those are the people who are best integrated into Germany. And
All right.
those who aren't, who are still living in housing containers, they don't think about going back to Syria because why should they? They're getting a way better life in Germany. In Syria, everything is broken. And of course, you're bound to the place you grew up, but the place isn't anymore. And for most of them, they're trying to find their luck here in Germany. And those who are going back are those we would probably need the most because they would be outstanding icons of good integration into the German society, and they are going back home.
Right. Well, they may all get kicked out of Syria again, depending on what they take. But yeah, that is, I mean, I'm sure I told you the story the last time we talked, but I remember having an argument in Romania with a group of guys who said, they were talking about how much, they had some cousin or something who was in Germany, and they talked about how much money that person got on as part of the social welfare in Germany. And they said something like, he gets 1,000 Deutschmarks a month. And I said, well, 1,000 Deutschmarks a month isn't very much money, really. And I was saying this to a group of people who were making 20 Deutschmarks a month or whatever, not very much money in Romania. And they said, they couldn't understand what I was saying. How could it not be a ton of money? It's like, that's a year's salary. And I said, well, because a pack of cigarettes is 5 Deutschmarks or 10 Deutschmarks or whatever it was at the time.
Like then I would say 3 or something, but yeah, sure.
3. And they were like, no, it's not. And I said, it is. I'm telling you, let me tell you. And I had just been in Germany, so I named some prices of things, like this is how much it is for a beer in a bar. This is how much it is for a loaf of bread. And they were like,
your firstborn just for a beer of bread.
They were like, that's ridiculous. There's no way that's how much a loaf of bread costs. And I was like, that's the thing. It seems like a lot of money, but it's also a different economy, different prices. So, yeah, I can see there would be a lot of people who, having left Syria, would be like, boy, going back there.
Well,
not as good as Germany.
Currently, I'm in Berlin, and things in Germany are changing. So the liberal students from the universities, they are standing with the suppressed, and so they are strong with Gaza. And it's quite stunning and shocking because in the houses next to me, they marked the outside of the buildings, writing down "Free Gaza." Here's a Jew living, and actually, it's being in Germany, growing up with the history of the Holocaust. It's so heartbreaking to see these graffitis.
But I thought that was strictly illegal in Germany to say that stuff.
And the provocation seems to attract them, but it's really mind-boggling.
Well, I think it's very much true here in the United States too. It's part of within the left, the Marxist dialectic has become the default in universities, and it has been since the 90s and before, but the French in the 70s, right? The idea that in every situation there's a power and powerless.
Yes, Foucault, Sartre, and
that's right.
They are dialectics on power and punishment.
It's always that there's an owner and a worker, or a dominator and a suppressed.
A slave and a master.
A slave and a master. And in this case, the left has decided that the Jews are white Europeans and the Palestinians are brown, essentially, Africans for all intents and purposes. And although there are only 14 million Jews and there are 500 million Arabs. The Jews are the representatives of white capitalist Western colonialism.
Mm.
And once you've established that dynamic, or once you see it through that dialectic of an oppressed and an oppressor, there's no way you can shake them out of that. And they don't see, they can't possibly see that for 2,000 years of the history of the Jews, they were seen as an Asiatic invader, not a white European at all. And that was true until very, very recently. But now the Jews are cast in this other role, and it's partly because they built a real economy in Israel in the last 50 years.
And they are the only functional democracy in the Middle East.
Right. I mean, my experience in Tel Aviv was that it was basically like Barcelona, and maybe a little nicer, like Barcelona, except Barcelona that's actually kind of works all the time. But as far as
No
that
siesta.
dynamic goes, no siesta, exactly. They keep going. But as far as that dynamic goes, there's no, you can't argue because really, if you listen to the Palestinian story with no context, you go, oh, wow, that's right. That's really unfair. Like, that's not good at all. And you really sympathize with the Palestinians. And then you listen to this Israeli story and you go, oh, right. Okay, that makes sense. I see where you're coming from. And it just, in some ways, when I meet people out in the world, I just feel like whoever told them the story first is the story that they carry with them the rest of their lives. Because there's no, because it really is just a case of like what sunglasses you're wearing.
There's a graffiti down the road where I'm currently in, and it says, "Free Gaza from German guilt."
From German guilt. That's the only reason.
They're saying that the German politics are supporting Israel because we're still guilty of the Holocaust and we won't see the war crimes happening over there.
Oh, that's awful. Well, the one thing that is the one thing that's very evident if you look at it from a global, from a real politics sense, from any kind of economic sense, is that all of the G20 nations, even if you extend that to the G40 nations, there's not a nation in the world that would trade Israel for a Palestine. Israel has a Western economy. It is, although, run by a bad actor. I mean, Bibi is a bad actor. They are a functioning democracy. And a Palestine, a Palestinian state, would be neither thing. It would have the same economy that Yemen has, and it would be a theocratic autocracy. And so it's not just Germany and the United States. There's no country that's part of the capitalist, democratic economic system of the world that will ever trade Israel for Palestine. And I don't think, and this is the thing, so there's a lot of what seems to me to be very disingenuous, sort of talking out of the side of their mouths, all of the negotiations, all of the United Nations work, all of the two-state solution talk. I don't think that Western governments are sincere when they say those things. I think they say them as a way of kind of kicking the can down the road. And I don't think the Saudis want a Palestinian state. I don't think the Egyptians want it.
Well, they closed the border in Rafah so they don't cross it.
That's right. And if the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians actually wanted a Palestinian state, they'd be doing something very different than what they do. Their actions and where they spend their money and how they receive Palestinians and how they interact with them, it would be very different. And so the whole game, and I think, having been to Palestine fairly recently, I think most of the Palestinian leadership also knows this, and the way that they interact with the global media world is very cognizant of the fact that a Palestinian state is not really what anybody is gonna sign off on anymore. You know, if Arafat had signed on the dotted line, who knows what the world would be.
But now Trump is going to make it the Riviera of the Middle East.
Yeah, and that's hilarious too. I mean, and that's another example of, like, he's such a clown, and he really does believe that he can just say, like, oh, yeah, we're going to make Gaza into like Palm Beach, Florida.
Mm.
And there's whatever 7 million people living there, and they're all going to move.
But looking back on the election, do you have an idea why the Democrats couldn't bring up somebody who would be a real opponent? So looking back, I always thought that J.D. Vance's biography would be perfect for a Democratic leader, but he got captured by the Republicans, and there was no real opponent. When Biden started arguing against Trump, and he was saying things like beating Medicare to death, and they were arguing about their golf handicap, I was just ashamed that they had no better candidate.
I mean, what American Democrats have done is that they've forgotten that they need to have a compelling story for people that that the Democrats are going to make the world a better place for everybody. That is going to appeal to just your regular person who doesn't wake up in the morning consumed with feelings that the world is unjust, but just somebody that's got to go to work. And the Democrats have always had a great story because we're pro-labor, we're pro-unionization, we're we regulate big business.
No uranium in your water.
We don't want uranium in the water. We want to tax very rich people and use that money for social programs. All of this story appeals to the majority. But the Democrats have lost the ability to tell that story because we decided that what we were going to do was really emphasize that we were fighting on behalf of the most disadvantaged, the most persecuted, the most downtrodden. And it's a very principled philosophy, but it doesn't resonate with most people because most people look at themselves and go, well, what about me? And so why do I care if some trans kid gets to play on the basketball team when I don't feel like I have enough? Like I'm a poor person, or, and so what liberal politics in America did was it became very fragmented. These people are talking about identity politics. These people are talking about homelessness. And then there's Elizabeth Warren who's talking about banks. Like, we have to reform the banks. And I look at her and I'm like, why aren't you president? But then Bernie Sanders comes in and says, oh, we need to, kind of enact this 60s dream of socialism.
Yes, but Bernie Sanders is 270 years old. So where are the good Democratic candidates? I'm still surprised because here in Germany, the debate will always shift and people are going to say things like, yeah, Michelle Obama should just run. She would win, of course. But it's hard to believe. And I don't think she even wants to. But that by side, where are the good, competent candidates that would show the world that the clowns that are in office are clowns?
There are many, except that the Democratic Party needs to have what we call a platform, and I'm sure that's true in Europe too, where there's an articulate argument, because any good candidate is only as good as the platform that they stand on. And the problem with Kamala was that the Democratic platform by that point was incomprehensible. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to do what now? Like just like playing whack-a-mole. And what needs to happen, and I think the Trump administration is a great opportunity for people on the left to take this time and really develop an articulate idea of what we're offering, why a liberal government is better.
And it's honestly your last chance, because for the up next election, you will have Mr. Beast and Taylor Swift trying to become president.
I think Tay-Tay would be a good president. I think she's very smart.
As a musician, you have to say that.
I do. I think she'd be a great president. But I do think that, yeah, we're on the cusp. I don't know. I know a lot of Generation Z kids, because my daughter is one, and Generation Alpha kids. And I don't know are you using those same demarcators in Europe?
Yes, I'm aware of them, but honestly, I'm not sure in which generation I have to sort myself. I'm born 1999, so I think I'm not a millennial or at the end of the millennials. I'm not sure, but yeah, the Generation X, Generation Alpha, I'm familiar with the terms.
And my sense of them, the kids that are now 13, 12, my feeling about them is that they have a kind of cynicism that resembles people of my generation, where they're just kind of exhausted at being lectured to all the time. They're exhausted by the kind of politics that's that very in your face politics. And they don't have any doubts about, they're not worried about gender politics, because they look at each other and they're like, yeah, okay, whatever you want, like you're a they, them, they don't get bothered by it. It's just normal to them. But they also don't want to hear about it anymore. Like they definitely don't want a teacher or a grown-up telling them about it, because they feel like they don't, grown-ups don't know any better, right? And so watching them and seeing how relaxed they are relative to the generation that was right above them, that was just so stressed, like so anxious all the time. And watching them be just so sort of like, whatever. That's exactly how my generation was. Because we felt like, the world's going to shit, all you can do is play guitar and smoke weed and hope that when the nukes go off that you don't feel it.
And you had patches saying no future.
We did. And we invented grunge music. And then one day the USSR went away and there was a stock market again, whatever it was. But the fact that her generation seems to me to be more level-headed, even at 13, 14 years old, more grounded, it reminds me that we're anxious about 10 years from now, but 10 years from now doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to them. And they're going to do, you're going to be 10 years from now, what? You're going to be
36.
36. And you're going to have a whole bunch of problems that you hadn't, that, you're going to have a mortgage problem, or you're going to have
your back starts to hurt.
Yeah. And you're going to have an 8-year-old or whatever, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to take you in a different way. And it's the 24-year-olds that are going to be setting the tone for what 20 years from now looks like, at which point I'm going to be in a little electric scooter, shaking my cane and saying, like, you don't remember what it was like, the Reagan administration.
Show some respect for King Neptune.
Yeah, look out, coming through, King Neptune. So I do feel that things are cyclical. And I think if we lived in 1848, if you lived in Berlin in 1848, you would feel like it was the end of the world. And certainly you would have felt that way in 1919. and really at any time, but between 1930 and 1960,
Well, but in 1919 in Berlin, you could get at the pharmacy the best cocaine made in the world.
Those were the days.
The Merck made the best cocaine, and there were counterfeits. So other cocaine producers, they faked the Merck logo on their bars of compressed cocaine to sell it as the high quality stuff.
This is 1890, right? Not 1990.
1919.
Oh, 1919.
1919.
Yes,
After the Second World War, going to Weimar Republic.
Yeah, that would have been the jazz age in Berlin would have been a marvelous time.
Honestly, I'm missing the golden 20s in Berlin nowadays. I've seen so many crazy people, sick and crazy people. So yesterday, when I was walking to the subway station, there was a woman calling at a telephone booth, and I was surprised that there even is still a telephone booth. And when I came back an hour later, she still was there talking, and then I realized she isn't talking to somebody; she's just crazy talking with the headset that's there.
Oh no!
And
but the telephone booth was still there.
The telephone booth was still there, but it's so sad to see how many people in Berlin got lost and really got sick, and nobody cares for them. So you can see every day some new crazy people doing things like where to start, where to end. I was at so we have a system that when you buy a bottle that's made for more than one use, you pay some upfront fee and you can later trade it in. It's called Pfand. And so I was at the supermarket, and there was a man with a laminated sheet around his hanging at his breast, and on the sheet there was the law written down and laminated waterproof that he is allowed to bring all bottles, not only those the store sells, to the store to return them for the fund money. And it was like a man from GTA 5. He was there crying, screaming, "No, I'm allowed. Here's the law. See my law," and showing his letter. And nobody seemed to care. Nobody had the feeling of helping him and
they were just walking around him,
deconfusing his situation. Yes, everybody was just avoiding him. He was a minor inconvenience, and nobody cared. And honestly, I don't like being in places where they don't care if you go crazy.
Well, now, here in the United States, we always assume that the social safety net in Germany and in Europe is strong, and there's mental health care, and there aren't the homeless problems or the crazy people on the streets problems in Europe. Is that not true?
Berlin is different. We have a lot of Eastern European migrants nowadays on the streets.
Yeah.
So at the end of most roads, you have a little park, and there's some playground and so on. And nowadays in these parks, there are always tents. So there are people living on the streets, and that's new. That wasn't there 5 or 10 years ago. And they aren't registered. They ain't getting any support. They are just here out and about. And it was way better. I remember a time where German social security was something of value. Nowadays, we have way too many people that aren't registered. They're just falling through.
And they're coming to Germany, and they're not receiving social services, and yet it's still better to emigrate than to live in. Because they're not coming from Belarus, right? Where are they coming from?
So some of them are from the Romania and East Europe, and
Yeah.
it's better to be on the streets in Germany than being at the streets of Romania.
Yeah,
but many of them they got here via Schengen, so the Europeans can travel easily within European countries, and they are allowed to work in every European country. So they have no problem immigrating, and then their documents will expire and they'll live on the streets. And they aren't registered. Berlin knows they have a problem, but there are people in power and position who when they would do a great job, they would make themselves useless. So I think that at least the homeless helpline in Berlin, they are working for themselves. They have some cases they show prominently, like here is Hassan. He came 7 years ago from Syria. Now he's working at a bakery, yada yada. But you don't see them promoting Piotr from Romania, who came here, got crack addicted, and is living in his tent in a park. So it seems that they are picking the reasons, the cases that are presentable, and they ain't caring about all the people who would need their help.
Well, how do you like the new government?
Well, so when the new government got elected, I voted for the Social Democratic Party. I'm a member of the Social Democratic Party, and I'm very against the new coalition because the new Bundeskanzler, the new Prime Minister or President, Friedrich Merz, he ran on so many lies. He said, no, there won't be any more state debt. He will, his politic of the black zero, die schwarze Null, he will make a cut, and Germany won't make any new debts. And at the first day in office, he and the back then old parliament, they debated on allowing some Sondervermögen, an additional fund they could spend. They said it's for Ukraine and for the war effort we have to pay, but they took, now I hope I don't confuse it with German and American way of counting. They got 1 billion, or no, it's 1 trillion. So 1,000 billion, billion it is. So a huge amount of money they organized with the old parliament before the new parliament got elected, because they wouldn't have a majority for that there anymore. And so he ran on saying we won't make any new debts, and his first action in office was making the most debts in the history of Germany. He argued that he's gonna make Germany safe, and he's closing the borders, something he can't even do. That's European right. So
You're right.
the man got elected on promises he couldn't keep, and he's only pleasing the older generation. Because, yeah, of course, we can now make some new debts and fix our Autobahn and all the bridges and so on. Because he and his voters won't be alive in 30, 40 years, so they don't have to care about it. And so I was very against him, and the Social Democratic Party, they had a election within their members if we agree or disagree for the coalition statement they agreed on. And I voted against it because it has a lot of totalitarian mechanisms, like controlling what can be written in chats, reading that the Quellen-TKI, the source control for telecommunication, is something they want to implement. So right now we still have some very strong protection of personal data, and they want to weaken that so they can control for terrorism and whatsoever. And
Right.
I don't know, I'm very unhappy, and it feels like the boomers are just doing their last round and they don't care about our future anymore. But well,
That checks out. That checks out. That's their MO, isn't it? And it's true here in the United States too. The Republicans are always the ones that claim that the Democrats spend. But if you look at the statistics, the deficits are always run up by Republicans.
Yeah, but
because they eliminate taxes.
The Iranian Sesame Street.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and Elon's going to save us, $500, and we'll be able to apply that to the debt. But these are weird times. We're living in weird times, and we won't know the full extent until we have the wisdom of retrospect. And when that happens, it's very hard for people to then look back at least in my day, people could say whatever they wanted, and then 10 years later, when it turned out the opposite was true, they could just pretend that they had always believed in the future. Now,
Okay, Glowpad, it's just like your opinion, bro.
Yeah, exactly. But now people your age are writing long passioned screeds and publishing it on the internet. So 10 years from now, when it turns out that a lot of them were not just wrong, but like violently wrong, it's all that writing is still going to be there. All those your TikTok videos are still going to be there. And I wonder,
but not for the US, because the US banned TikTok.
Yeah, we did. Well, and who knows what's follows. I mean, Trump may just build his own internet and call it Trumpanet, and then we all have to be on that, and we don't even get to be on Facebook anymore. We have to be on Trump Book.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's quite concerning, Mark Zuckerberg is trying to become president of the United States.
Ugh.
And I think he owns the machine that will promote him.
Yeah, but everybody thinks he's a real ding-a-ling. Like, I could not find you. If I went door to door across America, I couldn't find you a single person that likes Mark Zuckerberg. And it's not like anybody hates him.
I think his wife likes him.
Oh,
well,
I don't know.
He has no neighbors we could ask, because he bought all the homes around him for more privacy.
Yeah, right. Or just he bought his own island in Hawaii. But no, I think that the real danger is that the next president of the United States is Lady Gaga, or just somebody that that's not a politician at all. And that's always been an American fantasy, that somehow politicians are intrinsically bad and what we need are outsiders. But the problem is outsiders are not good at politics. They're bad.
Well, let's ask Elon about that.
Yeah, exactly. We did not need him. And I realized this when I ran for office. I ran for office here in Seattle, and I ran on an outsider platform. And I got in there, and sure enough, it is a situation where all the political people know each other, and it is a bunch of insider trading, and it is a system that from the outside looks very corrupt. But once I got in there, I realized, it's not corrupt. These are professional people. They're like doctors or lawyers or engineers. When you're looking at a firm of engineers, you don't say, we really should get some outsiders in there. They're just building these bridges like their old-fashioned way. Like, we need some activists.
Move fast and break things.
Yeah, and you don't need that when you're looking for a doctor either. And what I realized was being a politician is a profession. Most of those people have been practicing that profession since they were teenagers. They were active in politics when they were young. They're active in politics, and it's their life. And they know more about how to do it than I did, even though I was a very interested civilian, right? I came in thinking I knew a lot about politics.
I had my fair share when I was working for a member of the German parliament for the left party. I was her scientific support, and I was shocked that to the outside you're always saying, yeah, solidarity, we're all working together, but inside it's a shark tank. It's horrible. You don't have any friends. Everything that can be the advantage of someone else will be their advantage.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But, that's how law gets made. It doesn't get made because everybody passes a baby around and gives it a kiss on the forehead. It is brutal, but that's why the laws that make it through presumably last. Because if we passed laws based on how many thumbs ups they got on Facebook, we would have new laws every 6 weeks, and they would all be shitty.
Facebook tried to start a digital government called Free Basic. Back then they had the domain internet.org, what's a quite cool domain, I have to say. And they tried to implement that people can vote on new laws. And Mark toured around in South America, tried to promote his new Free Basic software platform so everybody could make their new laws based on Facebook elections.
Oh, good.
Well, John, I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope we won't spend a year till we talk the next time. It was a real pleasure having you here and talking about the state of the world. I will link your podcast. Is there anything you want to promote?
No, I think just the shows that I'm doing are what I would love any English speaking German listeners to dig into. I'd like you to go figure out how to correct that mistake about Bean Dad in your textbook.
I'll keep you updated on that one.
And I don't know, I don't know how many transcription bots there are that are transcribing all my shows into German, but I would, I'd love to see them bound in leather.
Like the Trump Bible.
That's right. Well, have me back on your show anytime, and I love to hear from people. So if anybody wants to reach out on their own, I'm happy to get a message.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye.